Welcome to ExtremeLives, coming to you tonight live from Bangkok. With me tonight is Mossarat Qadeem, who is the co-founder of PAIMAN Trust in Pakistan, which is a group that works to prevent extremism in Pakistan. Welcome, Mossarat.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good evening.
Thank you for joining us. So we want to talk about the area to begin with in Pakistan where you grew up, which is Peshawar, which is part of the northwest, used to be the northwest frontier province of Pakistan. Now, there are lots of militant groups operating on the ground there. It has a long history of extremism. But you have traveled and been through this area and grown up there. What did it used to be like before extremist networks took control?
A heaven on earth, beautiful. Very, everyone was very accommodative, peaceful. And there was like, everyone would accept each other as an individual with diversity, as an individual with a different thinking and a mindset. So when we were growing up, of course, there was a lot of, I would just say it was the most tolerant community in society that I grew up in, and there was no concept that who is Shia, who is Sunni, or who is Hindu or a non-Muslim in this community. Very tolerant, pluralistic community and society that I grew up in.
So we'll talk a little bit briefly in a minute about what happened to change that. But I think it's important to point out as well that this is an area that many people have seen on the news with different fighters, different groups, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, etc. But it's only a couple of hours from Islamabad, the capital city. It's very, very close, but it's also up against the Afghanistan border. So what changed in the last 30 years, essentially, to make this area a fault line for extremist groups to operate in?
Unfortunately, 30 years ago, I'll take you a little, back into the history of 1979 when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And some, of course, powers were interested in defeating Soviet Union on the soil of Afghanistan. They took the support from Pakistan government, and we were supporting not only the Afghan who were there, but also the Pakistanis, especially the youth, were sort of, they became the foot soldiers for somebody else's war, and they were given this name of Mujahideen, who became the hero of that whole jihad against the Soviet Union. To that end, it is fine because it was a war that was fought against the Soviet Union, and it was, again, Afghanistan was a neighboring Muslim country. We really wanted to help and support them. But if it had ended there, that would have been fine. And that was the time when this whole concept of jihad was sort of built in the curricula, in the media, and everyone would just speak about it.
So the Mujahideen fighters became heroes.
They became the heroes, and then it was, of course, all of a sudden the heroes of the defeaters of Soviet Union. All of a sudden, after 9/11, although they had nothing to do with 9/11, they became the extremists, or in their definition, became the Talibans, and that changed the whole situation for us as well.
So it was a group of fighters who were left with no role to play really in society. Is that what you're saying?
I am actually trying to put in that actually, we fought somebody else's war in Afghanistan. We, of course, then with the support of these Mujahideen, I mean, the Soviet Union was defeated, or they were sent back. And then the same Mujahideen who were the heroes at that time, they were left with a lot of weapons, with resources, with money, and uncontrolled. So when it was left, they were left uncontrolled, and already the curriculum that was formed and that was actually sort of developed somewhere else, not in Pakistan, that curriculum that became the part of all those institutions. And people started internalizing it yes, this is the correct way of thinking, this is the correct way of action. And that's why this whole phenomena of jihadist element got into our community and in society and into our thinking and into our psyche. And we just thought, yeah, this is the way and this is the right way.
Okay, so we fast forward a little bit past 9/11. through some very intense fighting in the northwest of Pakistan, international groups getting involved as well. What is the situation on the ground now in Peshawar if you move around the city?
Oh, thanks Allah, and of course thanks to the security forces, that through the series of the military operations, the area that was actually every day you would just hear about the suicidal attacks, about the bomb blast in the public places, and of course everywhere, and not only in Peshawar, but of course in the whole of northwest province of Pakistan, and of course federally administered tribal area, which is now being part of the northwest frontier province, which is called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Everything is becoming very normal now, and the people are having like a normal life. Everything is settled so far. Of course, the impact and the effect of that 30 long years of not only violent extremism, but of course the incidents of violent extremism definitely has left its mark on the community and the society, both on the psyche, and also on the socio-political and economic life. But we are such a nation, a resilient nation, that we are still with all those situations that we have coped with, and we have struggled through these years. We have emerged, I think I would say, a very successful nation who knows how to tackle the extremism and extremist at every level in the community and the society and the state.
So let's go back to when you started doing your work. Now, as somebody who had grown up in this area, and you had become an academic, you were teaching in the university, what was it that you saw or were hearing that made you feel that you had an idea of trying to find a solution to the problem?
When actually I used to teach in the university at that time, that was again quite a good time. The students were not inclined to extremism, because I believe that whenever there is something wrong happening in society, and if it is not indigenous, there is in the case of Pakistan, it was not an indigenous extremist movement. It was imported, and there were instigators who brought in this and instigated the youth, or instigated, I say, certain sections of the community and the society to adopt that way of thinking and that way of life. So and during my teaching time, it wasn't the case, and it was quite, like I said, the people were very accommodative. We did not see this sort of violent in the campus, in the university, which we witnessed a few years back in the form of the killing of Michelle.
So what your work, when it began, what made you motivated to move out of academia essentially and to start working with the women and the boys who were either being recruited into extremist networks, or you could see that they were susceptible?
Actually, it was 2007 when, on daily basis, the incident of violent extremism and suicidal attacks would be hitting the market and the public places. And of course PAIMAN was established long before that. That was 2004, and I resigned from the university in 2003. And what compelled me to actually join a social sector, that I saw that in the university I could only influence 140 students a year, but when I joined this sector, definitely I can work across Pakistan at the field, at the grassroots level, and be with especially with my sisters, that is the women in the community, and of course the youth as well. That is the focus of PAIMAN's work. So it was after during 2007 that we realized that we need to do something with it, because there was this was a phenomena which hard hit everybody, but we were not discussing it. There was no discussion around this issue of violent extremism, and everybody was of course affected by it. And we thought we have to engage the community, we have to engage especially the youth from the universities, who could be the change agent in their own respective institutions as well as in their own communities.
So your focus of the PAIMAN Trust is women and boys, youth.
Yes.
Why did you choose to take that approach? What did you see happening in the community in the way that people were acting, or the social structures of society, that made you think that that was the right way to move forward?
Two things that I really would like to highlight here. One was when we started working with youth from the university, and we gave them this task to go back to their own communities and start talking to the youth in the communities, because we just thought that they're being targeted. This is the data was with us. We knew that they are not being the target of the extremist groups, and this is the wave we have to sort of to work around this extremism. So we engaged the educated youth. But when they went to the community, they came back with a lot of stories that were horrifying, in a sense that they were telling us that there is much more happening than what we are thinking. And they came out with the real facts, with statistics, with a lot of stories, where this transformation of the minds and heart
what sort
of
things
the
were
youth.
they telling you? What were they coming back and telling you?
They just told us that the extremists are very active. And it is not only actually engaging the illiterate and the semi-literate youth, but also the educated youth have become the part and of the groups. They become the member of those groups. So that was an alarming situation. So what we actually did, we just told them that you have to convince one youth at a time so that we can handle it. And we don't we didn't want to be put on the spot that this is what we are doing. So we call it that the transformation of heart and mind. We call it positive engagement. And when the youth just started coming to PAIMAN Trust, to our Center of Conflict Transformation and Peace Building, we started working with them. We realized that he is not alone. There is somebody else. So this is how we started working on it. The second thing that is very important, then when we would work with the boy, we realized that it is if he is not alone, then that means there is something in the family, somebody in the family also who need to be engaged. Because if this transformed boy goes back home and he doesn't find the home environment and the community environment conducive to his transformation, then we really need to work not only with the parents at home, but with the whole of community.
So when they went into the community, you were seeing that the boys in the community level, they were being radicalized somehow. What was radicalizing them? What was causing this movement towards extremism?
Like I said, it's one is the situation where they were that we were for the last 10-15 years after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, that made it normal. And then later on,
who was approaching them? Were people going door to door? Was there
were different
messages?
There was different different pattern were adopted. One was, of course, individual, one-to-one, convincing and influencing the individual. And then there was, of course, peer influence also. A friend becomes extremist, then would definitely influence the other friend. And then there were other groups in the community who were using a lot of this pamphlets and the videos, the CDs, they become viral. And then there were certain individuals who, under the garb of I would just say jihad, they convinced everybody that they have to come out of their houses. And particularly in one area, that is Swat, the mullah, the extremist leader, would use the FM radio, and he allocated a particular time, that is after 9 o'clock, that was the women's time, and he would actually talk to the women about their issues, about their problems, about the problems of inheritance and the family issues. And the women found them so fascinated that it was for the first time somebody was talking to their issues and was actually giving them the solution. So that was a whole situation was created.
We'll get onto the women a bit more at the moment, but I want to talk a little bit more about the boys. So you saw that they were being radicalized. You saw that there were different routes to radicalization. There was the face-to-face group radicalization. There was some pre-social media times. There was the use of the DVDs that used to go around in the streets. People would hand them out to each other. And in addition, there was a manipulation of religion going on.
Of course,
is that right?
And religion was at many places it was religion, that was this ideology was used, and then there was like attraction of some money, and at the same time they were young, they were handed over like a mobile at that time, which was they could not think of with those with their meager resources. And then this this power, like you have the power to influence somebody, you have the power of the weapons with you, because they were handed over. In many cases they had the weapons also. So this was all sort of like this was romanticized for them, that now they have the power. So I would just say it was not the Islamic ideology that they had the love for. It was actually the love for power that sort of influenced their mindset.
So when you understood what was going on a little better from the work that you were doing, how did you then try to implement any programming here? And again, perhaps it's now time to talk about the roles of the mothers were playing and the women in the community, and how influential they were in either promoting or preventing these boys taking that journey.
Okay, let me just put it this way. When we actually just saw that, yes, women definitely need to be engaged, and that is a story to it. I was actually working in Swat, and somebody told me, oh, don't go to that house. But I went to that house, and I just started talking to the mother, and she said, oh, I'm being chased after, and I'm being in very difficult situation, but my son is innocent. And I said, okay, fine, if your son is innocent, let's see how we can help you. And then I came out of the house, and I told somebody in the in the government that let's support this woman because her son is innocent. And he said, you are talking about the mother of Umar, I mean not the real name, and said yes. And he said, you know what he has done? He detonated actually a remote from his rooftop, the remote control device, and killed 7 army personnel. So I just thought, this mother sitting at home, not realizing what is happening at her on her rooftop. I thought we need to engage this mother, because I found her innocent, but at the same time ignorant of what was going around her. So we started working with those sort of mothers who had no idea what is happening around them. Also some mothers who already were radicalized, who were already influenced and convinced by the speeches of the extremist leader. And there were the mothers who we could felt that they could be taken away because they are vulnerable. Their situation is such that they can be influenced by the others and could become the part of the group.
So the women were playing many roles here, essentially.
Yes.
There were the women who were just ignorant and not really understanding what was going on, some of them. Be interesting for you to tell how some of those mothers reacted as well. But what about the ones who were maybe not even actively facilitating or making it known in their family that this was an acceptable or perhaps even a heroic thing to do? How did you work with those women?
Yeah, this is important, because most of these women were influenced by the ideology that jihad, like I said, the speech would just say, oh, you mother of believers. If this is the speech coming from the leaders of the extremists, that, oh, you mother of believers, if you don't send your son, this is your duty to send your son for jihad, so that you actually win the heaven after death. And this was the convincing power of that leader, that the women were influenced by it. So that was one. The second thing was the women also were influenced by the whole situation, because it was created in such a way that the women have to contribute to jihad, not only in this form by sending their sons, but also by raising fund. And I think the common story that is well-known story is that the women of Swat, we have a women peace builder now. She's a peace builder. She's our peace builder now. She used to travel. She said, I would travel by foot and even by public conveyance and collect the gold and money. So she was a fundraiser. And there was a woman who was actually the sister of a police man, and she was the informer of the extremists because her own 3 sons were with them. And then there were the women who actually would mobilize other women to join this group of women, so that they can either send their sons for for jihad, the so-called jihad, which so this I would just say, in the case of these women, it was not only the women. There were actually, the other women in the community also, some sort of like teachers also who were a part of this group. So they were doing different jobs, fundraising, facilitating, and supporting.
So these women were in a very conservative patriarchal society. Perhaps they weren't even allowed to venture outside by themselves. Probably were not in the workplace. They were working at home if they were working anywhere. How did that dynamic work, that from inside the house, that they were able to produce this kind of nurture radicalization, really?
I would just say they did not actually, it was not a movement at all. It was not a systematic sort of a movement, because they were doing it in their individual capacity. If that had become like, a group work, if they had networked with each other, that would have been really destructive for us. But thanks God, like, they had their own limitations, the cultural, of course, taboos and patriarchic society of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The only thing which is very important, and one of the women just said, I didn't even ask from like, usually in a Pakhtun society, you have to seek the permission from the husband to go outside the house. And she said, but I did not tell my husband what I am doing. So, and for me, that was an eye-opener, because we can't do it that way. I don't know from where these women got the heart and the courage to do so, but like I told you, when it comes to like Islam, these women were ready to make any sort of sacrifice. And why did they? This is because one of the reason was, and that's how we actually responded to it, was their lack and knowledge of the Quran, because the way the text of the Quran was being used, particularly regarding jihad and the role of the women in it, was out of the context. So we started using, like, when we would try to sensitize these women, we took into account different, like, aspects of it. One was, we had to educate these women on the context, the text of the Quran with the context, particularly with the role of women and the jihad, the element of jihad. Second, because these women were not used to asking questions, so you had to build their critical thinking, that they should, like, start asking question. So one was the knowledge. The second was when, okay, how to have a dialogue, how to convince, like, So one was the dialogue.
One-on-one with the women, or did you gather them?
Initially it was one-on-one, but then we, of course, it was increasing in number. So we just said, okay, we can actually, have a group. And the most difficult part is, like I said, taking them out of the house was the most difficult task. So what we did, we actually would just tell, okay, let's train you on certain livelihood skills. And that was also, we could not take them out without the, of course, the convincing the male in the community that yes, it is good for women to learn some skills, especially in, like, in such a situation. So the men in the community were first, like, approached by us. We approached them. We built a trust with the community. Only then they allow the women to go out. So when we will be actually training them on the livelihood skill, simultaneously we will be giving them, educating them on these various aspects of what are the early signs of, like, violent extremism in an individual and in the community.
And how important was the ability for them to make some money, to actually have these skills where they could work in their own private spaces to earn money for the family?
Initially it was very small, because these were very small skills that we trained them in, but later on, when we put them in groups, they started supporting each other. So we had to actually give them the skills that the products could be sold within the local market. So, like, I would just give you an example. The samosa making is like a patty, and that they could just make it. The son can just take it to, or the male relative can take it to any school and can just sell it. So that was the initial, like, process that we started giving them the marketable skills.
Because you were mentioning as well that one of the tactics of the militant groups, extremist groups, to recruit was to provide money, mobile phones, etc. Was countering that in a financial sense by providing other ways to make money important?
I think it's we are actually going into a lot of, it wasn't like that. See, because you really need to capacitate the whole community to understand the negative impact of violent extremism. One. Secondly, you really need to empower everyone in the community to respond to that situation. And this is what we did, because it was not only the youth that we engaged in transformation, but also the women in the community. And it's not only the mother that we focused on. We actually worked with the teachers. We worked with actually the media representative. We also worked with the police women, and we also worked with like the rest of the women in the community whom we just thought they could lead a situation like this.
When you say we work with them, what kind of work?
We build their capacity and all these aspects of prevention of violent extremism. We gave them like the tools, and we gave them the knowledge how to respond to the situation. So, and we also provided them with the platform. The platform was, we don't call it peace group. It was basically women Tolana. Women Tolana means togetherness in Pashto, and the youth Tolana. So mother and the youth Tolana, women and youth Tolana would work together on the early signs of like violent extremism in individual and in the community, and then they would also engage like some of the government entities, particularly the police also, to respond to the situation. So it was a whole of society approach that we adopted at that time, when this whole of society approach was not even introduced as a concept to prevent violent extremism.
So where we're talking about quite local level kind of interventions, and but there in Pakistan there are so many other issues to do with inter-ethnic conflict, religious conflict. How do you, is it scalable, or do you use other programming to work nationwide? I mean, what do you do with your
actually, I would just say our approach is, no doubt it is indigenous. It grew up, it evolved itself. We had a lot of problems while developing it. It evolved. So I would say it's organic. And the second thing, most important, is it can be replicated anywhere in the world because it has a framework, and that framework is and the basic actors are there in the community. So it's basically like internal community mechanism in the form of these tolanas and in the form of this whole community approach that is helping in the prevention of violent extremism. So it can be replicated and adapted anywhere in the world. The only thing is you have to understand the situation. So whoever wants to go with this intervention, they have to do three things which are very important. They have to know the context, so they have to put it in the right context. Second thing is they have to be trusted in the community, because this is such a sensitive work. Without the trust of the community, you won't be able to even put a step in that community. And the third important thing is you have to have the capacity, because if you don't have the capacity, you won't be able to capacitate the other. So in the case of PVE and prevention of violent extremism, even this concept is not understood by many. So, and then you have to have the commitment and the zeal to do it against all odds.
Okay, well look, I think we've got through nearly everything we wanted to talk about. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Mossarat Qadeem is the Executive Director and co-founder of PAIMAN Trust, an organization that works to de-radicalize and prevent violent extremism in Pakistan. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll be back soon with the next episode of ExtremeLives. In the meantime, you can check out YouTube and Facebook. Thank you. Thank you.